France in the 18th century had a fascination with bloodshed and execution. The reign of terror following the execution of the French king and queen saw thousands of people being killed on the guillotine, the device which was created to efficiently take the lives of many people. But before the revolution there was a man who was condemned to death for the attempted assassination of King Louis XV in 1757, and he was subject to an incredibly horrific and sadistic execution, which did go wrong. But what is the story of the death of Robert-Francois Damiens? To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Robert-Francois Damiens was born in January 1715 near to Arras, and from a young age he joined the army. He was then discharged and he worked as a servant inside of the College of Jesuits in Paris. He was later sacked from this and many other jobs, and he gained the nickname Robert the Devil. Many believed he was insane or suffered from delusions. However, he would later claim that he was agitated by religion. He then began to blame the king, Louis XV, for this, and he then began to plot. On the 5th of January 1757 at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, and as the king was climbing into his carriage at the Palace of Versailles, Robert pushed past the king's bodyguards and pulled out a penknife, and he then stabbed the king. He only made a small wound into the king. He then didn't even try to escape and was jumped on by the bodyguards and then arrested. The king's thick winter clothes added a layer of protection, and the knife went less than half an inch into his chest. But Louis was bleeding, and he did worry that he would die, and he even asked a confessor to be brought to his side. The queen even came to her husband's side, and she allegedly prayed for his forgiveness, as he had had a number of sinful affairs, and she was worried that this would not allow him to gain access to heaven. Robert-Francois Damiens was then taken away to prison, and he was tortured to reveal any information of any people who may have helped him or sent him to try and assassinate the French king. He was brought to trial after his torture was unsuccessful, and he did not name any other accomplices. But at his trial he was brought in front of two judges, and because of how dangerous he was considered to be and unpredictable he was tied down and secured on a bed with guards armed with swords stood over him, and he was held down by belts in a form of a straitjacket. But for attempting to kill the French king, he was condemned as a regicide by the Parliament of Paris, and he was sentenced to be drawn and quartered by horses. This was a different punishment to be hanged, drawn and quartered, as horses would literally be attached to the limbs of a prisoner before they were sent in different directions and would pull someone to pieces. On the 28th of March 1757, Robert Damiens was brought from his prison cell and was taken for his execution, and on the way he said, "This day will be hard." When he arrived at his place of execution, he was first tortured. His legs were painfully compressed in a device known as a boot, and then he was tortured with red-hot pincers. The hand which he held the knife that lunged at the king was then branded and burned using sulphur, molten lead, molten wax, and then boiling oil was poured into his wounds, which was very agonising. He was then handed over to the French royal executioner, Charles Henry Samson, who then cut off Robert's genitals, and he was then harnessed and tied to horses. His arms and legs were secured to different horses, and then they were scared and driven off in different directions, but this did not go well to begin with. At the start, his limbs did not separate well, and then the officials then ordered the executioner to sever the tendons in his limbs, and once this was done, the horses were driven off again, and he was dismembered and ripped into pieces. The crowd applauded and cheered, and it was said that his still living torso was then burned at a stake, and others claimed that he died following the removal of his last arm. It's believed Robert-Francois Damiens' last words were, "O death, why art you so long in coming?" and he cried out to God for mercy. One witness of his execution said that, "We had the courage to watch the dreadful sight for 4 hours. Damiens was a fanatic, who with the idea of doing a good work and obtaining a heavenly reward, had tried to assassinate Louis XV. And though the attempt was a failure, and he only gave the king a slight wound, he was torn to pieces as if his crime had been consummated. I was several times obliged to turn away my face and to stop my ears as I could hear his piercing shrieks. Half his body had been torn from him. Was it because their hearts were hardened, they told me? I pretended to believe them, that their horror at the wretch's wickedness prevented them from feeling the compassion which his unheard of torments should have excited. Following his death, the remains of Damiens' corpse were then reduced to ashes. They were then scattered in the wind. His house was razed to the ground, and many of his family members were forced to change their names, and his father, wife and daughter were eventually banished from France. But this was a shocking act of regicide, which had not been seen for over 150 years in the country, but Damiens became an infamous criminal even after his death. However, Robert-Francois Damiens was a notorious criminal who tried to take the life of King Louis XV. He was a man who seemed disturbed and suffered with delusions, and he was incredibly disaffected, and he blamed the monarchy for many of his issues. But he met a terribly brutal end, and was executed in horrific scenes in Paris, a place in the following decades which would become brutal, and the bloodshed would run through the streets of the French Revolution. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.